Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has announced an economic growth target of around 5% for 2025 while delivering the government work report at the opening of the National People's Congress. The report outlines an array of key development goals for this year, such as inflation and fiscal targets. What does an around 5% growth target mean to the world's second largest economy? What measures will China take to promote continuous economic expansion? And what are the key challenges China faces in order to achieve its goals? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Professor Qian Jun, Executive Dean of the International School of Finance at Fudan University, Professor Zhu Ning, Deputy Dean of the Shanghai Advanced Institute of Finance at Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and Michele Geraci, former Undersecretary of State of the Ministry of Economic Development of Italy. Welcome to Dialogue. Well, Qian Jun, I will start with you. I believe all of you have followed the report, delivered by the Premier. So I wonder, what are your takeaways from the work report?
So it's a very good report. I would highlight three things. First of all, the overall goal of 5%. Around 5%. So the important thing is not just the number. It comes with a series of supportive policies to give confidence to everyone that this goal is achievable. That's first. And two, it puts a lot of emphasis on consumption. That is, for the Chinese economy in 2025, in order to reach the 5% goal, consumption will play a very important role. And again, there are specific policies helping the country to achieve that. And thirdly, while 5%, around 5% is always the number that people pay most attention to, I also pay attention to two other very important numbers. One is this expected CPI growth of around 2%. That's very important because if we can achieve that, that means we are recovering. We are recovering from a weak domestic demand. And two is the number of new jobs to be created, because we know that stability in the labor market, employment, is also very important for people's lives.
Well, Zhu Ning, what's your takeaway?
Well, I think I agree with QJ has said. I think with probably two additional points. One is, following up on what QJ said, which I tend to agree with, is, well, there are some very concrete policy measures which are being rolled out, some very specific about targeted at consumption, some very targeted at specifically targeted at inflation, some very specifically targeted at the fiscal policies. So I think it's not just a matter of we have a set of goals, we also have a set of tools and policies to help us achieve that goal. So I think that's very important. And two, I think consistent with what has been laid out in the Central Economic Work Conference, I think fiscal stimulation is still very much emphasized. I think the 4% of fiscal deficit is largely in line with what people have been hoping for. And in light of the further slowdown in the real estate market and the aftermath of the COVID, I think some more active fiscal policy is required. And I think that is largely anticipated by the market and also consistent with the policy being laid out earlier. And then at the same time, I think it is quite important that we have also a wide range of measures targeted at social welfare. So policies about how to improve the minimum wages, how to improve the health and the educational conditions of a vast number of netizens, which I think is, while we're putting as much emphasis on growth as we can, we're also including the welfare of the wider part of the society.
So Michele, around 5%, the goal for this year, and that's also the goal of last year or the year before. Obviously, given this, let's say, growing external challenges and together with the domestic challenges like the weak consumption, can we say, still the Chinese government sets the target of 5%, around 5%. Some say this is a show of confidence of the Chinese government to achieve that kind of economic expansion. Do you agree?
In a way, yes, I agree, because remember, the announcement of GDP is both an input and an output of the GDP itself. You set a target, but if at the same time you also clarify a little bit of how you're going to achieve those targets, and other guests have mentioned it, and the government gives a statement of confidence that we'll achieve it, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because consumption, of course, consumers' confidence would go up. And you are right to point out that 5% is exactly the same number as last year. So the hidden message in the report by Premier Li Qiang is that growth is not slowing down. And this is a very important statement, almost more important than the actual number. If it was 4% last year and 4% this year, it would have been equally similar message. Growth is continuing at the same rate, but of course, starting from a higher base, 5% with a bit of inflation, a bit different than higher than last year. 5% today is worth more than 5% yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's very important also the actual number. I tell you also as a professor, I look at the employment situation of young people, 12.56 new jobs created in urban. This is a very good number, and also sets another target for young people that and for people that migrate, of course, from rural area to urban areas, that this is what they're going to find when they enter the job market in the urban area. We need to put this into context. Of course, my country, Italy, will grow by 0.6%. The rest of Europe maybe 0.5, 0.7. So we are really below 1%. So China's growth is 7-8 times more than what we have in Europe, and it's been consistently like this. So this is very good news also for us, because we also want a prosperous, stable, and growing Chinese market that, of course, is a new market for our products, and also is a trigger for the development of other surrounding markets in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and the rest of Asia. So very good message. Growth is the same as it was last year.
Mm-hmm. Professor Qian Jun, picking up of what Geraci mentioned about the job market, of the creation of 12 million jobs for this year. Tell us, some say the 5% or around 5% economic growth is necessary in order to create that number, 12 million jobs every year. Why 12 million? Why this number is important?
Certainly, again, I'm sure they've done a lot of careful calculation based on the number of jobs created last year. And as you said, which I agree, in order to ensure enough new jobs to be open, you need to have high enough growth. So again, this is a very important number, around 5%. And as I already said, it's not just a number. There's a series of policies, including a very important 4% deficit figure that was clearly higher than before. That's clearly higher than before. Now, what I would like to comment on the employment situation is that given new developments that we have observed over the last few months, the reason the Chinese government is confident to put out a very large number of 12 million jobs is because there are now many new areas for employment. And that's particularly related to an increasing number of AI applications in different industries. And we know that in the short run, that will create a lot of high-paying jobs. That's one. And these AI applications can be applied to a lot of areas, traditional industries and new industries. The second thing I think it's important, and this is also related to consumption, right? So there should be a lot more consumption-related jobs. So on the one hand, consumption is very important to contribute to overall GDP growth. And the second part is that on the employment side, there will be a lot of small and medium enterprises working in the consumption sector. And as long as they are recovering and consumption becomes more important, there also should be more jobs. Another thing that will help boost the confidence of all the sector in terms of consumption, I think it is another big event, which we have a we have a blockbuster animated film, right? I mentioned this because this animated film is both, it's actually high tech.
Yeah, no job the second,
But
right?
it's
Yeah.
also,
Okay.
but it's also related to the big sort of consumption. So, so to me, the reason the government is confident to put out this number is because at least in two new, relatively, two big areas. One is AI applications, and two, consumption in general. These are important areas to stimulate growth, and these are the areas that should provide a lot more good paying jobs.
Well, Zhu Ning, consumption, indeed, it was prioritized as a number one task among the 10 tasks the government is to deal with in this year. I mean, it shows the importance of consumption, despite the realization that it is still very low, it is weak, it is not strong, sluggish in the sense. And probably we cannot rely on the trade or the external market anymore. You have to come back and focus on the domestic consumption.
Yes, I think I've been saying this for probably almost a decade. I think domestic consumption has to be the driving force for China's economy to go from the high mid-income level to high income level eventually. I think no other countries except for the oil production countries have managed to avoid this path. So I think that is the path that China has to consider very seriously. And also, I think it is very important that we are feeling increasing pressure from the export side. I mean, both because China's capability has been rising and also because the geopolitical tension has been intensifying. So in that way, I think it is very proper for the State Council to set its number one target to be boosting consumption. And I think there are at least two major ways that we have to work hard towards. One is, of course, disposable income. I mean, we have to ensure that the income level increases, which will give households the ability to consume. The other, which has been emphasized for quite a few years after COVID, is confidence. I mean, it's not just that households have the money to spend it, they also have to have the confidence that the economy will grow better, their income will grow over time, and their life will become better. So I think, the many policies outlined in the work report of the State Council has been touching upon those areas, which I think is very encouraging in light of the greater uncertainty in the geopolitical environment and in the global macroeconomy.
Well, Junior, if you look at some of the numbers earlier, also mentioned by Professor Qian Jun, the deficit ratio had risen to 4% from last year's 3%. And at the same time, there will be ultra long special bonds of 1.3 trillion plus 300 billion yuan earmarked for this consumer goods upgrades as a bit of a special program for trade-in, right? Automobiles or other appliances with some rebates there. Plus, there's a monetary policy. We are seeing the change from being prudent to moderately loose. That change of more than 10 years now for the first time, such a change. How strong are those supportive policies in terms of economic growth and consumption here?
Well, I think there are several ways of looking at this approach. One is, I think has been said a long time ago, during a period of economic slowdown, confidence is more valuable than gold. So in a way, I think they're sending very encouraging signals, which I think is by itself very important, because this is what is going to make a difference to the confidence and to the mentality. So in that regard, I think it's maybe just a small wording change, but it's actually sending a very strong signal about Chinese government is trying everything in its capacity, trying to boost the economy and trying to bring the economy back to its potential growth level. So I think that is very encouraging. In terms of the absolute number, both in terms of the fiscal deficit, in terms of the special purpose bond, in terms of the super long-term bond, I think they're in line with the market, but I think the government can be a little more aggressive. So for two reasons. One is, we all understand that, there are still a lot of headwinds for the global economy. So export, which has been lifting China's economy over the past 3 years, will be facing increasing headwind this year, both because of the the protectionism and because of the slowdown in the global economy. So I think export will not be able to help China's growth as much in 25 as it did in 24 and 23. So that's one clear reason. And the second is, I think we want to make sure that the sentiment or the confidence can shift fast enough. I mean, if this doldrum in confidence is allowed to drag for too long, then it will take even greater efforts to bring this back to the normal level, to stimulate consumption, to bring the stabilization to the housing market. So I think in the interest of trying to stabilize this before things become even more slower, I think the policy can afford being a little more aggressive. I mean, so I think the beautiful part of the work report is almost all the key numbers has around that number next to it. So in that regard, I think the government does have both the support and probably the authorization from the CPC to use the best discretion when it comes down to implementation of those policies.
Well, indeed, Geraci, if you look at another area, earlier also we mentioned about this high-tech sector, AI, 6G, in particular, AI-powered mobile phones, AI-powered probably like new energy phones, and also robots, let's say, as Qian Jun said, application of these AI technologies. So this is the area probably to work as a new drivers for economic growth, given, of course, we have problems still existing in property sector, for example.
Absolutely. We need to, in a way, shift our philosophy of looking at China from low-end manufacturing, real estate, which I call them, let's say, the industries of the past, although they are important today, into a future vision of Chinese economy, which is going to be a high-tech, innovation-driven economy, where real estate will count less and less. So it is important to stabilize it, to maintain things as they are, but the investment and the vision need to be exactly in these new industries, such as AI. Now, it's not me that tell you, my Chinese friends, the greatest development of many Chinese large language models. We have Alibaba, we have Tencent, and we have DeepSeek, of course. What have they told us in Europe? They have shown that on one hand, hardware, GPU manufacturers, such as NVIDIA and others, may suffer because perhaps these new technology don't need as much as hardware as possible as before. On the other hand, they have shown that having cheaper and fast access to these new systems can actually spur the development of new applications. I'll give you a very example. 20 years ago, we had Cisco. There was the hardware manufacturer, and we all bought Cisco shares, which then crashed. Why? Because we then realized that the internet was going to be free for all. What happened then? We had companies like Amazon, Google, riding on this cheap infrastructure to offer what people wanted. What is it that people want? People don't want GPU, CPUs. They want to buy online books. And this is what Bezos understood. Hardware suffered, application that run on top of the hardware flourished. And this is the vision that I have for China, something that could spur initiative, startups, innovative investment into the application on top of this now relatively cheaper hardware.
Well, also in this sector, Qian Jun, earlier you mentioned about the CPI. I want to connect it probably. CPI is about consumption. Actually last year it was 3%, now is 2%. So what's the signal here? I mean, is that we shouldn't have a too high expectation probably for consumption demand, or somehow we keep it moderate, like 2% here?
So as I said, I think this CPI or inflation target is actually very important. So you are right. In last year's government report, if I remember correctly, we did set a 3% increase on the CPI. And they actually released the actual number. The actual number is 0.2%. And in 2023, it was also very low. So basically, we have at least 2 years in a row where basically there's no inflation. Now, I'm not going to use another word that's the opposite of inflation, but clearly,
this is the pressure.
Clearly, this is the pressure. Clearly, when the most important price index has no movement for 2 years in a row, you worry. And then, as I said, this is a very strong signal that domestic consumption is weak. Domestic aggregate demand, especially consumption, is very weak, as Professor Zhu Ning pointed out. So I think the 2% is a very good number because it's actually very hard to go from 0.2% to 3%. Again, for me, the number I have in my head will be something like, if we can have 1% this year increase, that's actually satisfactory to me. So 2% to me is actually a very good number, because that shows, if we can get there, that shows we are certainly out of the trap. We're certainly moving away from a weak consumption environment. And again, this is why, as discussed earlier, to come with this CPI goal, we need a series of measures, very specifically on the fiscal side, on the monetary side, to boost consumption. But in order to boost consumption, you need to increase households' income. And of course, that's also related to employment, because a lot of people, if they don't have job security, there's no way their income is going to stabilize. So I think this 2% is something that's practical. It's actually also sends a very strong signal that the Chinese government, of course, the 5% is again the overall, the number that attracts the most attention. But I put as much weight as this 2% as that 5%, because if we can have a 2% actual 2% CPI increase, that's another proof that consumption is back. Mm-hmm. And consumption is the most important driver for growth.
Qian Jun, of course, related to consumption or confidence of consumers is about the business environment. You won't have confidence in the private sector, for example. You won't have the foreign investor would rather have confidence in the Chinese market, right? We do have some reforming measures recently being rolled out by the government to welcome foreign investment, and also like a top leadership meeting with executives of some private firms. What do you make of that?
Again, I think all these things are important. I would single out the President Xi meeting with the entrepreneurs of these private sectors, and again, if you see which entrepreneurs attended this, again, they are from traditional industries, if you will, the older generation of entrepreneurs. But you also have people under 40, founder of DeepSeek, and also the founder of this robot making company, also based in Hangzhou. And of course, we see these platforms, both Tencent and Alibaba. So I think that's a very clear signal to the entire world that the Chinese government is firmly supporting the private sectors. And because we have spent some time talking about technology, so another message is very clear from the meeting is that, as President Xi also said, this is the best time for these private sectors to boom, and they can do very well in traditional industries, but also in the frontier industries, including AI applications, robotics, and these tech sectors. The fact that the Chinese firms, entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, have done pretty well without as much investment as their counterparts in the US is actually proof that these private companies are very good. They're very good at doing this. They're very good at applications. Maybe they're not the original inventor of something, but as long as China still has one of the largest market, if you have good products applying these technology, you will be very successful. And again, this is all tied together in that the private sector driving growth, private sector driving technology improvement, and also driving consumption.
Consumption.
Of course, in addition to the meeting, there's also a lot of other things. For example, there's going to be a law supporting private sector growth that will be announced and enacted.
Professor Zhu Ning, there are some also new phrases being mentioned in the work report and the new saying, let's say. There's at one point the stress of the stabilization of the stock market as well as the property market. Why the stress on this?
Well, I think it is a very important point that you have brought up. I think the property market and the stock market are really important to the economy in so many different ways. The stock market are providing much needed capital to both entrepreneurs and to the transformation of some of the more traditional companies. So merger and acquisition has been mentioned in the report as well. And also that is creating a lot of the wealth for the average households. So stock market and real estate market are the biggest two components of Chinese households' asset allocation within the country. So I think that is very important. It is also important in a way about real estate, for example, used to be the largest sector of China's economy. It single-handedly contributed to about 18% of China's growth. And in related areas, I think it contributed to about 1/3 of China's economic growth. So without a stabilization of the housing market, I think it's a drag on both the production side and the consumption side. So it is still very harmful for those developers which cannot finish their apartments. And then the damage can be felt by the households who have paid down their sometimes life savings as down payment, but that cannot obtain a place to live. So I think that is also very important. Again, I think how to stabilize the housing market, the biggest piece of information or piece of need is to stabilize the belief or the expectation of the market. So I think I'm really encouraged by the Premier in saying, well, this is a really much emphasized area which the government is working very hard on. And I think starting around the turn of the year, I think we're seeing the turnaround in the stock market in both Hong Kong and in Shanghai and Shenzhen, which is very encouraging. I think in a way, Chinese equities are very cheap in terms of static valuation. At the same time, I think the increasing uncertainties in the rest of the world is actually proving Chinese government or Chinese market to be having the confidence of foreign investors. So hopefully, this is one place where the foreign investors and domestic Chinese investors are working together to provide more stability and hopefully a bullish year for Chinese stock market.
Michele, briefly, of course, we have to mention this, the challenge, external challenge, Trump's tariffs, on Chinese exports, of course, on many other parts of the world too, European countries included. So how big a challenge is that to the Chinese economic growth? Briefly here.
I think less than people fear, because China has already, in a way, decoupled from its dependence on European or American market, and is focusing more on the Southeast Asian growing market. So, and we see from the response, the Chinese government has not responded strongly to Trump's tariff, just maybe a little act that needed to be done, a bit of tariff on soybeans. But basically, China is almost ignoring the situation, not raising walls against the imports, which is very good, and concentrating on the other 6 billion people around the world that are a growing and strong market as well.
Well, on that note, we're coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qingzhuo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.